Hi, my name is Lilly Bernardi, and I'm an assistant strength conditioning coach at Hofstra University. And today I'm just re-recording my presentation from the NSCA New York State Clinic held in Ithaca, New York on April 29th of 2023. And my topic of discussion at the clinic was what my degrees did not teach me about being a strength conditioning coach. And really, the main objective of this presentation is to discuss how, although my education prepared me well for the science behind strength conditioning, the X's and O's, and the programming, there's a whole other side to being a strength and conditioning coach that I didn't realize until I actually stepped foot into the field. And what that side is the art of coaching and how to take a program that you've written and bring it to life with a group of athletes, how to be an effective and also potentially an impactful coach in the lives of your athletes. So just a brief background about myself. I went to the College of New Jersey, TCNJ, and studied health and exercise science and graduated in May of 2020. I also played women's lacrosse there. My first internship was during my senior year at TCNJ, and I worked at the Lawrenceville School, which is essentially a boarding high school in New Jersey, where I was able to work with high school athletes. And it was those coaches who recommended that I go and get my degree in, a field related to sports science or strength conditioning, which is how I stumbled upon Hofstra University. And I was a graduate assistant there from the fall of 2020. And then in the spring semester, I became a volunteer assistant strength conditioning coach there. And I began programming a little bit and actually working with, my own teams. And then that following year, while I finished my master's degree virtually for one semester, I had my first full-time role as an assistant strength coach at Fordham University, working with baseball, rowing, track and field, cross country, men's squash, and men's golf. And that's what now currently I'm in my new role at Hofstra University, just concluding my first year, where I'm an assistant strength conditioning coach working with women's lacrosse, women's soccer, track, cross country, and men's golf, as well as holding some other roles as our internship coordinator, as well as being a adjunct professor in the exercise science department. Now, my topic, I really broke into 5 different areas. First, we'll go over the art of coaching. Then the majority of the time is spent on building relationships. Next is experience, personal development, and wearing multiple hats. So the art of coaching, I'd argue this entire presentation could almost be called the art of coaching. However, I really broke this down into 3 different areas. First is developing your coaching voice. Next, developing your coaching style. And then last, developing your coaching philosophy. So when it comes to developing your coaching voice, the questions, you want to ask yourself here is 1, how do I communicate? 2, what is the size of my team and what setting am I in? Because that may greatly affect, how you're communicating with your athletes. And really throughout this presentation, I'm going to kind of backtrack to some stories into how I really came to learn these things through my own experience. So when it comes to developing your coaching voice, when you ask, what is the size of my team? Am I working with a men's golf program who is about 7 to 8 athletes? Or am I working with a baseball or a lacrosse program or even a football program where I may have 40 to 50 plus athletes with me at a time? And that could greatly, affect how you're communicating, how loud you have to project with that group. And then next asking, what setting am I in? Am I in the weight room where I'm about to break down for a lift, or am I out on the field? Is it a conditioning session? Are the athletes all around the field? Is there music playing during a warm-up? All of these things are really going to affect how you're going to project or communicate so that you can make sure that your athletes are hearing you and you're getting through your session in an efficient amount of time. Now, the story that I kind of think back to is when I was first a GA, at Hofstra. I had been there 1 to 2 weeks working with men's and women's basketball, but mind you, it was during COVID. So we were only able to have about 5 to 6 athletes in a certain amount of space at a time. So for a team like men's and women's basketball, that is not too difficult. You have about 2 groups to get through all the athletes. However, when it comes to a team like men's lacrosse, who carries a roster of about 50 athletes, that would be about 10 hours or 10 sessions to get through the team once. And that's typically a team that trains 2 to 3 days a week. So the coaches really had to get creative with how they were going to coach those sessions. And ultimately, what they did was we had 2 large groups out on the on the lacrosse field. So we had group 1 of men's lacrosse and group 2, and basically we had 25 athletes in each group, and we ran them in 5 different stations. We had a plyometric station, a speed and agility station, a conditioning station, and then accessory work with resistance bands, and then another station of accessory work with plates or dumbbells or whatever we carted out that day. And so it was a full hands-on operation. We had the sport staff, the strength staff, including myself, out there, and everyone was running one station. So for me, I ran the plyometric station, and I was responsible for 5 athletes, which, doesn't seem too bad. It's reasonable. However, to put it into context, I was working with 5 athletes out on a field where there were 4 other coaches yelling and 20 other athletes doing something entirely different. The music was blasting on the speaker, and on top of that, we were wearing masks because it was COVID. So I learned pretty quickly how to project and make sure that these 5 athletes were hearing me so that we can get through our session in the proper time, because we were on timed stations. Next, it comes to developing your coaching style. And the questions I ask here are, what approach is most effective for me, but then also what approach is going to be the most authentic for me. So when considering what approach is the most effective for me, I think as a young strength and conditioning coach, it's very common to mimic or replicate the style of maybe a coach you've had in your life, whether it's a sport coach, whether it's your own strength coach, or a mentor you have. And what you might find is that you can replicate it, but that approach might not be the most effective for you as a coach. And then the other question to ask is, what approach is the most authentic for me? So I've definitely heard that, being on the floor for an hour, you're putting on a performance, right? You want to keep your athletes engaged. You want to make sure that they're working hard. You want to supply some energy to them. However, what I would also argue here is that you don't want to put on a fake persona that the athletes aren't going to respond well to and kind of see through. So I think that if you're, replicating a mentor or mimicking their coaching style and trying it out, that's fine. But if ultimately you feel like it's not an authentic approach for you and it just doesn't fit you well, and also you're not getting the response from the athletes that you want, that there are tons of different approaches to coaching, and that's okay. And then last, when it comes to developing your coaching philosophy, questions to ask here are, what are my core values? What is my goal as a coach, and what is my why? What drives me every day? Why did I want to become a strength conditioning coach in the first place? And, I have a short list of things on my coaching philosophy, but ultimately what it comes down to is I center everything around the word impact. And my main goal as a coach is to make a positive impact on the lives of the athletes that I'm dealing with, and also just additional staff that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And really what this comes from is I have been so blessed to have such great coaches throughout my life, whether it's sport coaches, strength coaches, mentors, and they have impacted me so much that, it brought me into this field, and it made me want to become a strength conditioning coach myself. I learned so many lessons in the weight room that, I've carried with me for years, and, really wanted to go into this field and hopefully have a similar impact on the lives of the athletes that I get to deal with on a daily basis. Next, we'll go into building relationships. So majority of these relationships are, the relationships that I deal with on a day-to-day basis as a collegiate strength and conditioning coach. So, some people may be in different settings, but I do think, there's going to be carryover between all of these different dynamics. And we'll spend the majority of the presentation kind of going through each of these relationships. But a quote that I felt like my presentation was incomplete without was the quote, "They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." And I think step one in being a good and effective coach is going to be developing trust, whether it's between athletes, other coaches, interns, or athletic trainers, whoever it may be. So first, the strength conditioning coach to the strength staff. And I think what to look at here is one, when piecing together a staff, I think you want to put together a group that is maybe similar in a sense, that you are going to get along well, you can work well together, it's going to be a good fit. However, I would argue that you almost want to piece together a staff that is different. I think that, if my weaknesses are someone else's strengths, then we can kind of create a united front as a staff. We can look at, okay, well, what can each person contribute? Are you someone who's great with technology? Awesome. Can I learn from you and, get better at that myself? Or, look at what other people's strengths are and really see what each person can bring to the table and what each person can contribute. Once you have that staff, developing a culture as a staff is going to be important. So setting standards, traditions, expectations that you have all across the board. I think another thing to note here is that, not all schools function out of one weight room. So at Hofstra, we have 2 weight rooms on campus, but our standards, our expectations, our culture, that's something that should remain consistent between the 2 weight rooms. And, on the topic of 2 weight rooms, when it comes to daily scheduling, I might not see my entire staff every single day. So it's very important as a staff to figure out, okay, well, how frequently are we going to get together and meet and, catch up on, the big things, the small things, the day-to-day. If we're not having face-to-face time more than once a week, if that's all we can do, are we still in contact? Are we texting? Are we calling each other? And then my personal favorite is, when are we training together as a staff? I think most coaches get into the field because in some capacity they love to train. And I think, it's a great experience and a great bonding experience for a staff when you can get together and train as a group. The next relationship we'll dive into is the strength and conditioning coach to the sport coach. Now, first and foremost, I think it's very important to learn the background of the sport coach that you're dealing with. Where have they played and where have they coached? Because depending on the level they have played at, the level they have coached at, that may affect their expectations of you as a strength coach, but also just from the team and from the athletics department. So I think it's really important to understand their background and where they're coming from, because that may give you some insight into why their expectations are what they are. And I think it's equally as important to look into what has their previous relationship with strength and conditioning been. Are they a team that, you can just have free reign to say, hey, I want the team to lift 3 days a week. I want to condition 2 days a week, and this is what we're going to do? Or is this a coach that, kind of sees the benefit of strength conditioning, but they're not entirely bought in? And is this a coach that, okay, step one, we're going to foster this relationship, and then maybe in the future we can work a little bit more to find a common ground and, get the team training a bit more if needed. When it comes to goal setting, what are the short-term goals versus what are the long-term goals? Is this coach looking at this season as, we are winning a conference championship this year? Or is the coach saying, we have an outstanding freshman class, and maybe it's not this year, but maybe within the next 4 years, we should be winning a conference championship, and maybe there's a little less pressure on that year, and you can really take the time to develop the team culture, to develop the team, and, just kind of asking that coach, okay, well, what can I contribute to these goals, and in what ways can I work to make this happen? And then culture, standards, and expectations. Just as a strength staff, we have our culture, we have our standards, and we have our expectations. Each individual team is also going to have their own set of culture, standards, team rules, expectations. And I think it's really important to align values with that coach, right? So one example that comes to mind is when it comes to gear. Is this a team that matches from head to toe? We have some teams at Hofstra that, whether it's a lift session, it's a conditioning session, they match from head to toe, top, bottom, everything. So much so that sometimes if the team is wearing sweatshirts outside and they're doing a conditioning session, and one athlete or, captain on that team decides that they're taking their sweatshirt off, well, guess what? The whole group is taking their sweatshirts off. Versus we have other teams who, as long as they're wearing Hofstra issued gear, their coach is okay with it. So now if you look at these two scenarios, right? If I have someone on the first team who is supposed to be identical whenever they're at team sessions, and they come into the weight room and they're not wearing the right shorts that day, or they're not wearing the right top that day, well, when their coach asks why were they kicked out a lift that day, they'll understand that. Versus if we have this second team who does not have to match entirely, and when their coach comes and asks me, hey, why was so-and-so kicked out a lift today? And I say, oh, they weren't wearing the right shirt. Well, that's not really a team rule that they have. So we want to make sure that we're not confusing our athletes, and we do have some consistency in the rules and expectations across the board. Next, dealing with the strength coach to athlete relationship. I think, obviously our job is to develop the athletes as athletes, but we also need to learn about the people that we're dealing with on a daily basis. The first thing that I tell any of my interns is to learn the names of the athletes. If you can't do so, then you're not going to progress in the internship. Anyone who's read How to Win Friends and Influence People, the quote of, to each individual person, their name is the sweetest sound they've ever heard. One, it shows that, you cared to remember the name of the athlete. And then second, it just makes your coaching so much more efficient. If I know the name of every single one of my athletes, I can coach from across the room. If I see someone doing something wrong, I yell their name, I give them a cue, and we're good. However, if I do not know the name of my athlete and I see something wrong with their set, now I have to make my way all the way over to them, get in their line of vision because I don't know their name, and then I have to give them their coaching cue. But who's to say they're still even on that same set anymore? So learning their names, one, shows that you care, and second, it makes your coaching so much more effective. And my advice with learning the athletes' names is also get to know a bit about them. Where are they from? What is their major? What do they want to do when they get older? What are their career aspirations? Because I think that once you kind of make that connection between an athlete, but also get to learn a little bit more about them, it's going to help you learn their names a little bit better. Next is understanding what drives and motivates the athletes, and, understanding their goals as well. Does this athlete want to be an all-conference player? Does this athlete want to be an all-American? And if we know that about our athletes, well, can I use that to push them every day, right? If I have an athlete that is half-assing our conditioning sessions, or they're half-assing their sprints, but they want to be an all-American, well, those two don't line up. So can I use that goal to help motivate that athlete every day? And then this line I loved, I heard in a podcast with Andrea Hootie, but the idea of we are teachers, not trainers. And I think that if you are someone in this field who is just a trainer. You're someone who just gives the athletes a piece of paper and says, okay, go ahead, get stronger. You are missing out on a huge opportunity to make everlasting connections and impacts on the lives of these athletes. We're in a unique situation as strength conditioning coaches, because as much as you look on, the sport roster and we're there on the bottom as their staff, we're not their direct sports staff. And, sometimes we can be a confidant to them. We can be someone, is there something that they may feel more comfortable telling us than their sport coaches that we may need to know when it comes to, who knows, nutrition, life, whatever it may be. So we have the potential to really be role models and someone that these athletes can really trust. And last is just meeting the athletes where they're at. And I think that this is definitely important. I don't think you have to over explain things in a sense, but I think it's important to recognize that although some of our athletes may be exercise science majors and understand training a bit more than others, a majority of our athletes are not exercise science majors, and they don't have the background and the education that we have. So they might not really understand why they're doing certain things. So wherever I see fit, I'm going to explain movements or prehabs or exercises to the athletes, one, in terms that they understand, right? I'm not going to whip out my fancy vocabulary. I'm going to explain it to them in terms they understand. But also, if it's a movement that I think has direct correlation to their sport, I'm going to tell them that, because that might take an athlete who kind of just goes through the motions and is like, oh, why are we here? Why are we lifting? And they can kind of see the vision a little bit more. So I rather take the extra 2 minutes or so to explain something to an athlete in their terms and make that connection and maybe get a bit more buy-in than to, just never take the time to do that and have the athletes kind of training without a goal or an idea of why they're training to begin with. Next is the dynamic between the strength coach and athletic training. And an important question to ask here is, how many different athletic trainers do you deal with on a daily basis? Because this answer can definitely vary. I work with 5 teams and I work with 3 different athletic trainers. I'm definitely lucky that one of the athletic trainers that I work with for women's soccer is the same as the athletic trainer that I work with for women's lacrosse. So the transition from the fall to the spring was pretty seamless because we already had a good dynamic. We understood how each other operates, and that made, the turnover from season to season definitely easier for us. And questions to ask when it comes to athletic training is, what is your communication like? What is the easiest means of communication? Is this someone who goes mainly by email, phone call, text? Are we located close enough where we can get face-to-face time every week? So location comes into play as well. On my side of campus, as I mentioned, we have 2 separate weight rooms on campus, but we also have multiple athletic training rooms on campus. So one of our athletic training rooms has a window that looks directly into our weight room, which is definitely helpful because at certain times, depending on what team I have in, depending on what athletic trainers are in, if it's the athletic trainer that works with the team that's in the room at the time, well, that just makes things easier for me. Let's say something comes up and it's not something I can really modify on my own. Maybe I send that athlete to the athletic trainer, or I can just pop my head in real quick and be like, hey, so-and-so said this is bothering her after practice. What do you think? And, we can communicate fairly quickly that way. Versus if it's someone who's across campus, well, it might be a phone call or a text away, or wait till the next injury report to, kind of see and modify on your own for now. Next is the idea of collaborative programs. So although ultimately I am the person who decides what is getting put into the lifting program, I would say that that is not just my own creation. One, as I mentioned, I like to talk to the sport coach and see what goals they have for their athletes, or even what areas they think their team is lacking. Do they need to be faster? Do they need to be more powerful and explosive? In the same way, I will discuss with the athletic trainers what they think we could use in our programs. First, what injuries are common within this sport, but even further, what injuries have we seen within this team? How is that going to affect maybe prehab exercises or things that we think we need to strengthen or work on with this team specifically? So although I decide what goes into the program, I am definitely taking, thoughts and feedback from coaches, athletic trainers, and really make my program a collaborative effort as well. And then the last thing to explore here, I tied this in with athletic training, is that at Hofstra, we're lucky to have physical therapy on campus. So if we have athletes that are with the athletic trainer but need physical therapy, they can complete their physical therapy on campus. And actually, the physical therapists utilize our weight room on campus as well. So we can kind of see the athletes day to day. Now, the reason why this is so important is because as a strength coach, my direct contact is the athletic trainer. And if we have a student athlete who's going to physical therapy, I can only get updates through the athletic trainer. So if we had physical therapy off campus and this athlete goes to physical therapy off campus and they come to me that day during lift and they're like, hey, I got cleared today. Well, until I hear that through their athletic trainer, they haven't been cleared in lift. And if physical therapy is off campus, then the physical therapist has to go to the athletic trainer, who then has to go to me, which makes that line of communication take a little bit longer and not as quick as, it happens when we're fortunate to have all three of us within 10 feet of each other. Next, strength coach to exercise science. The first question asked here, well, do we have an exercise science department on campus? What does that mean for internship possibilities? Can we have undergraduate interns? And then can those undergraduate interns turn into grad assistants? Can we have both? Next is teaching opportunities. As I mentioned, my staff has opportunities to teach in the exercise science department. Currently, I'm teaching a class on advanced programming for athletes, and we also teach some exercise technique classes, as well as the internship counting as a credit for the students. Next, when it comes to collaborating with exercise science, is there collaboration that occurs? We do some performance testing with our athletes at Hofstra, and essentially what that is when the athletes are returning to school for the year, we have them all come through our performance testing. And basically what the performance testing is we have strength and conditioning run a series of tests such as depth drops, wide balance, hand grip dynamometers, FMS shoulder testing, and some other things. And then we have the physical therapists and athletic trainers getting their injury history and using goniometers to get hip, shoulder, internal, external rotation, looking for imbalances. We also have the exercise science department and some exercise science students help, and it's a full hands-on operation. And then ultimately what happens is the exercise science department will run through the data and send it back to us and send us areas of, concern or, potential concern for different athletes. And we get this data for each of our team. And basically the way we've used that in the past is to help us with our prehab selection. So team by team, we come up with prehabs based on, common injuries within the sport, common injuries seen within that team. But then some of us use what is called a performance prehab, which is basically an individualized prehab for each athlete depending on the results of their performance testing. So, if we see that someone lacks some shoulder mobility, they may have additional shoulder mobility. If someone maybe doesn't score great on the Y balance test, are they doing like a 3-cone drill, kind of mimicking the Y balance test and, working on that a little bit more. So that's kind of like how we've used that in the past. Next, participation in research studies. We have some awesome professors in the exercise science department at Hofstra that conduct research studies, and myself and a few of the other coaches on campus have participated and been subjects in these studies to help them out as well. And then when it comes to utilizing equipment in research labs, maybe the utilization of bod pods or VO2 max testing, if, the exercise science department has access to that. And then last is creating a reputable program, right? The students that are going through the exercise science department and then also coming through our internship program, we are both working hard to help this individual, help this intern with preparing for the next step. And, a lot of times this may be preparing for their CS exam. So through the classes that the exercise science department is teaching and through our internship and through our internship syllabus and hands-on experience, we're trying to prepare them to pass their CS exam. And then also just mutually for both departments, have we placed interns and students into the field of strength and conditioning? And, can we reference those people that have come up through our program and been successful in the field? Next is the strength coach to interns. And here it's important to kind of look at the career aspirations of your interns because they definitely may vary. One, you may have interns that are aspiring strength and conditioning coaches and are looking to actually get into the field. Sometimes you get other interns that are interested in strength conditioning, but really focused on going somewhere else within the sports performance model and really want to look at how does their potential career path intersect with strength and conditioning and really understand how, those two interact with each other. Or is this someone who is in a totally unrelated field and maybe just checking off an intern credit? Now, with all three being a potential possibility, it's important for you to understand what each intern is looking to gain out of the internship experience, right? Are we forcing them to step out of their comfort zones? I've certainly had some interns who maybe aren't looking to get into the field, but maybe they just have some more personal goals. Maybe they want to be more comfortable in social settings and being forced outside of their comfort zone. And with that, just evaluating, am I giving them the tools to be successful in whatever it is that they want to do through this internship? The next is strength coach to mentors. I think it's very important as any coach, but especially as a young coach, to seek mentorship. And, mentorship doesn't always have to come just through working with specific strength coaches. One, it's important to understand who your influences in the field are and to have mentors that are strength coaches and develop relationships with them. But you can also navigate, mentorship through different sport coaches. Are you someone that is looking to be a basketball only strength and conditioning coach? And can you seek mentorship through sport coaches? Can you, call that coach up and ask them your day-to-day questions? Hey, coach, when I was at so-and-so, if this situation happened, how would you have liked me to handle this? Do you have any advice for me to approach this situation? And then similarly, seeking mentorship in administrators as well. I think the biggest thing is in this field, you never know who knows who, and to have a good, connection and relationship with each of those people is very important. Big thing here, even after maybe you are no longer at the same location as your previous mentors, Are you still staying in touch with them? Is that someone that you have fostered a good relationship with? You can reach out to them for career advice. Can you ask them, day-to-day questions? Can you ask them about the politics involved in college athletics sometimes? Are you going through a career change and just need advice to navigate that? And also, if you're fortunate enough to not just get advice when it comes to the job, but also life advice from these mentors. And now, taking this and turning it around a little bit when it comes to mentorship, asking yourself, okay, well, what have I learned through my mentors that I want to pass down to the next generation? And with that, evaluating, well, am I a mentor to anyone currently? And if so, am I doing a good job of mentoring them? And the last relationship we'll go into here is the strength coach to the strength and conditioning community. So nowadays, I would say there is definitely no excuse to not make connections within the field. You can connect through social media, through attending conferences, traveling with teams, going on site visits within your local area. Most coaches' email addresses are right on the website for that school. Can you just shoot them an email and introduce yourself? And then also, can you just hop on a Zoom call, maybe with another staff or some other coaches, and talk shop? And with that, then evaluating, well, how am I perceived by the strength and conditioning community? What am I putting out there? How am I connecting with people? And just evaluating, your connections and how you are portraying yourself within the strength community. And last, just with this, it's really important to just share ideas and connect with people who have similar interests and values to you. The next topic is experience. And yes, having experience on here 3 times was on purpose, because I truly believe you can't get enough experience within the field. One, experience is going to be great for getting your coaching reps in. And the story I reference here is there are such small, minute things that you may not think you need to practice, but sometimes you certainly do. So one, I reflected back on my time when I was at Fordham University and when we handed out whistles to our interns for the first time. And as much as you think maybe you wouldn't have to practice using a whistle, a highly anticipated moment in our office was when an intern would go to blow their whistle for the first time, and all you would hear is a gust of air come out it. So as much as you think maybe you wouldn't have to practice using a whistle, sometimes you do. And that'll come with practice and time getting your coaching reps in. Another story here is my first time running a conditioning session was with one of the coaches at Hofstra who ran the men's soccer team. And I was outside, I was running the conditioning session, and that's a team that if they jump the line or they jump the whistle, the team has an extra rep. Well, in my experience, I was blowing an inconsistent whistle. So sometimes I would say ready and then give a whistle, or sometimes I would just give a whistle. So if, some athletes are waiting for me to say ready, or they're not expecting me to say ready, and they're just waiting for me to blow the whistle, and then they jump the line, well, technically that team has another rep, but really whose fault is it? Because I'm not being consistent with my coaching cues. So, something that you don't really realize you have to practice, but just being consistent with your cues as a coach. And with getting your coaching reps in, I always urge my interns, and I was urged as an intern myself, just to make sure I always had a notebook on hand, right? If there's a coach around while I'm coaching a session, asking them, hey, can you give me some feedback on how that went? What do you think? What could I do better on? And then also just every day, write down a self-evaluation. This is what I did today. This is what I improved on. This is what I want to do better next time. Next is learning yourself as a coach. So kind of dipped into this a little bit earlier, but how you speak, how you cue, and more specifically, the conciseness of your coaching cues. So the first time I gave an athlete a coaching cue, I'm sure it was something almost 3 paragraphs worth of coaching cues. And as you begin to cue, what I think is important is rather than giving the athlete a ton of information and leave them standing there like a deer in headlights and have no idea what to fix, it's going to be important for you to learn to kind of prioritize what cues should be worked on first. What is the most important thing to fix? Have the athlete focus on that, and then go down your list. If you give the athlete too much information at once, they're going to be overwhelmed and not really know exactly what to fix. So kind of learning the hierarchy or prioritizing what you want to cue first and making it as simple for the athlete as possible. Next, in learning how to deal with different types of athletes, I'd argue that your main goal is going to be to get an athlete to perform at their best. Now, to get an athlete to perform at their best, that may mean that you are approaching different athletes differently. It's important for me to understand my athlete. This comes from building that relationship, building that trust with my athletes. So if I have an athlete and let's say we're testing, right? And typically like I'm getting excited for my athletes, I'm loud, I'm behind them, spotting them and, cheering them on. I may have an athlete that thrives under pressure. I may have an athlete that loves that. But I have literally had athletes before about to get under the bar, turn around to me and say, hey, just don't do that. And, that comes with trust, right? That athlete trusted to turn around and say to me, hey, I'm really not going to do well if you're yelling and screaming. So please just don't do that. And I think that maybe if I didn't have a good dynamic or a good relationship with that athlete, they may have not said anything at all, got under the bar and just failed because they don't respond well to that type of coaching. Next with this experience comes, seeing the behind the scenes of the job. When it comes to meetings and how meetings are going to pop up throughout the day, the scheduled meetings that you have, throughout the week, but also the impromptu meetings that come up, the text you get from a sport coach saying, hey, can you pop up to the office real quick? When it comes to recruiting talks, not realizing how much you may have to practice your talk to recruits. If a recruit comes by, well, what points are important for me to emphasize? How am I really going to help sell the program to the recruit? And how can I, be part of this experience of, the sport coaches that are trying to get this athlete to attend campus? And then we'll get into additional responsibilities in the upcoming slides. And then last in, experience is just through experience, developing your network and your circle of people. So, if you leave a good impression and, a positive influence on the group of people that you work with, who's to say that their network doesn't open up and become your network? You never know when a coach you're working with gets a phone call. Let's say you're an intern and a coach that you're working with gets a phone call from so-and-so across the country that says, hey, we have this position opening. Do you have anyone in mind? And if you left a good impression on that coach, they might say, hey, yeah, actually, I have a really good intern that, has their certification and they might be perfect for this position. So developing your network and really expanding and opening that network is huge and, can be achieved through experience. Next, when it comes to wearing multiple hats, these are not all titles that I hold, but some that I do, really just the ones that I could kind of come up with. So first, being an internship coordinator and running an internship program could be an additional responsibility. Next, coaching in other settings. Even though, my job is as a collegiate strength conditioning coach, I also continue to take on clients, majority of which are high school athletes. So continuing to challenge myself, working with younger athletes who may not have as much training experience as the collegiate athletes I work with. And honestly, my first personal training client ever was a 73-year-old woman who just wanted to be able to stand up off the couch by herself. And really, that training definitely looks different than what we do in the collegiate setting. So just keeping myself on my toes and experienced and, trying different coaching styles and techniques and working with different populations. Next is teaching. As I mentioned, we're able to teach in the exercise science department. Then when it comes to nutritional guidance, are you someone that holds a nutrition certification? And with nutritional guidance, I would say this is within your scope of practice, right? If you have a sport nutritionist hired at the school on staff, well, maybe that's someone that you're going to refer an athlete who has more specific goals, weight loss, weight gain, whatever it may be. Maybe that's someone that you're referring them to. But just general nutrition questions, if someone comes up to me and says, hey, coach, which one has more protein in it? The protein shake or the protein bites? Awesome. I can answer that question. So helping some athletes out with just general nutritional guidance things. A big one is when it comes to supplements, right? Making sure our athletes are running their supplements by us so that we can ensure that they're NCAA approved and they won't pop up on a drug test. Next, when it comes to technology and social media, technology, huge in our field these days, whether it's, catapult, GPS, lasers, whatever, anyone has, but someone may be super strong with technology on staff. And then also just the use of social media. I think it's great to see that a lot of the schools have their own strength conditioning social media pages. And I think that's a really great way to continue to interact with other schools, but also with our athletes, right? I've heard the phrase fish where the fish are. Well, all of our athletes are on social media. So can we interact with them? And then last is if you are someone who is taking on more of an administrative role, and maybe that falls kind of within that sport performance model that is becoming more popular. And the last slide here, the last topic here is on personal development. Main points are understanding that this is an ever evolving field. The science changes frequently. So making sure you're kind of keeping up with all the changes that are occurring within the field, but also making sure you're staying open-minded to new or different ideas. Here, it's important to seek out people who are getting results, but also to recognize that there are a million different ways to achieve maybe a similar or different goal. So making sure that, you recognize it's not just a one-way street, it's not just a one-way path, and people who are getting results are getting them for a reason. So maybe looking into that and, questioning, is this something that I can incorporate into my own programming as well? With this field, it's definitely a field where I believe you can't just talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. So what I mean by that is, first, before putting anything into a program, I'm going to try it myself. That way, when the athlete, let's say they're laying on the floor doing a hamstring curl with, the sliders, and they're asking, hey, coach, what should I be feeling with this? Well, I can answer that question because I've done that movement and I know exactly what it feels like. So making sure you're trying things before you put them into a program. And then next, training yourself, but also training yourself and, whether maybe you're posting it on social media or the athletes are walking by the weight room and they see you training, I think it goes a long way for credibility and buy-in with the athletes, right? You're not just someone who's barking orders at them. You're someone who goes out there and trains yourself. I last year ran all of women's lacrosse conditioning tests, and I was tagging them on social media every week, trying to show my athletes, hey, I'm out here doing it too. I told my women's soccer team that, they're running the beep test for their conditioning test this upcoming fall. And I told them, anytime you want to reach out to me, if you're here during the summer, I will run it with you. And then, as I mentioned, just staying up to date and continuing to evolve and develop yourself. Reading is huge. Podcasts, whether it's going on them or listening to them or hosting one yourself, speaking at or attending conferences. And then also sometimes I think it's a little slept on, just how much you learn from talking shop in the office. I try to urge my interns not to just grab their backpacks and head out right after a session ends. Sometimes it's the moments in between where you can actually debrief on a session that I find you learn the most as a coach or an intern or whatever it may be. And really, just to sum up this presentation, I want you to think of any influential coach or person that you've had in your life and ask yourself, what have these people had in common? And for me, the answers are, these are people who have made me feel motivated, who have made me feel inspired, maybe have made me feel supported. But really, what I want to highlight here is that all of that is about how these people made me feel. So the quote I'll end on is, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I truly feel that in this field, it is awesome to see athletes improve every week. It is great to see them hit PRs and, records and get stronger. However, that'll come and go. And I really feel that if you take the time to foster these connections and these relationships, you can make an impact on the lives of the athletes that go beyond the four walls of the weight room, but also that can exceed their 4 years at your school. You can make a lifelong impact on these athletes if you, as a strength coach, focus not only on, the science of coaching, but really of all of the other parts of coaching, the art of coaching that goes into it.